The sting of betrayal isn't a single event. It's a lingering poison. For Olivia Adler, that poison was administered in a ballroom filled with crystal chandeliers and 100 smiling assassins. Her ex-husband Preston, a man she'd sacrificed everything for, stood with his arm draped around his new fiancée, a woman whose success was built on the ashes of their marriage. He raised a glass, his voice echoing through the microphone, toasting a future she was never meant to have. In that moment, broken and invisible, Olivia had no idea that a forgotten past and an unimaginable fortune were about to collide, turning her world and theirs upside down forever. The annual Sterling Foundation Charity Gala was the glittering pinnacle of the city's social calendar, a place where fortunes were pledged and reputations were cemented. For Olivia Adler, it was the seventh circle of hell, and she was walking into the fire with her eyes wide open. Her boss at the small architectural firm, Mr. Henderson, had insisted the entire team attend. "It's about networking, Olivia," he'd said, oblivious to the personal horror the event represented. 2 years ago, she had walked into this very ballroom on the arm of her then-husband, Preston Montgomery. He was a rising star in private equity, sharp-suited and sharper-witted, with an ambition that burned like a furnace. Olivia, a talented but unassuming architectural drafter, had been his steadfast support system. She'd worked extra hours to help him through his MBA, proofread his proposals until her eyes blurred, and put her own career ambitions on the back burner, believing they were building a shared future. That future had shattered 6 months ago. The divorce was swift and brutal. The reason had a name: Brenda Finch. Brenda was a vice president at a rival firm, a woman who moved through the world with the predatory grace of a panther. Preston hadn't just left Olivia. He had upgraded, as he'd once drunkenly implied to a mutual friend. He had traded in a reliable sedan for a high-performance sports car, and tonight they were being celebrated. Preston's firm was a major sponsor of the gala, and he was slated to give a keynote address. Olivia clutched her small, worn handbag, feeling profoundly out of place in her simple, off-the-rack navy dress. All around her were women in designer gowns and jewelry that cost more than her annual salary. She tried to busy herself by the silent auction tables, pretending to study a signed piece of sports memorabilia, when a familiar, dreaded voice cut through the air. "Well, look what the cat dragged in." Olivia's spine stiffened. She turned to see Preston looking insufferably handsome in a custom tuxedo. Beside him, Brenda Finch was a vision in blood-red silk, a massive diamond engagement ring flashing on her finger like a weapon. "Preston," Olivia said, her voice tight. "Brenda, I'm surprised to see you here, Olivia," Brenda said, her smile a perfect painted slash. "I didn't think this was really your scene." The implication was clear. "You don't belong." "My firm has a table," Olivia replied, forcing a polite neutrality she didn't feel. Preston smirked, that familiar condescending tilt of his lips that she now realized was not confidence but pure arrogance. "That's nice. Good for Henderson's little operation. Still drafting blueprints for suburban kitchen remodels." The jab landed precisely where it was intended. Olivia's dream had always been to design sustainable, innovative public spaces, but her current job was creatively stifling a necessity to pay the bills for the cramped apartment she now lived in. "It pays the rent," she said, her cheeks flushing. "I'm sure it does," Preston said, then turned his full attention to Brenda, pulling her closer. "Did you know darling Olivia was the one who encouraged me to get into leveraged buyouts? She used to stay up all night reading financial textbooks with me. A real cheerleader." He said the word cheerleader with a dismissive tone, as if it were a quaint, pathetic hobby. Brenda laughed, a light tinkling sound that grated on Olivia's nerves. "How sweet. It's a good thing you found a partner who can play on the field with you, not just watch from the sidelines." The cruelty was breathtaking. Every word was designed to remind Olivia of what she had contributed and what she had lost. She felt the eyes of people nearby turning towards them, sensing the drama. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of her own making. She had to get away. "If you'll excuse me," she mumbled, turning to leave. But Preston wasn't finished. He held up a hand. "Oh, stay for a moment. They're about to introduce me. You should hear the speech. I even give a little nod to the people who helped me get here." His eyes gleamed with malice. He was promising one final public humiliation. As if on cue, the master of ceremonies took the stage. Olivia was frozen trapped in the orbit of their toxic success. A few minutes later, after a glowing introduction, Preston stood at the podium bathed in a spotlight. He was charming, witty, and confident. He spoke of ambition and vision of seizing opportunities. And of course he said, his eyes scanning the crowd and deliberately landing on Olivia, "For a fraction of a second, I wouldn't be here without the support of people who believed in me even when my vision surpassed their own understanding. And most importantly, I stand here today because I found a true partner, a woman whose brilliance and drive match my own. To my fiancée, Brenda." The room erupted in applause. Brenda blew him a kiss. The spotlight found her and she basked in it. It was a perfectly crafted narrative positioning Olivia as the simple, small-minded first wife who couldn't keep up the necessary but ultimately disposable booster rocket for his ascent to the stars. Olivia felt a wave of nausea. She stumbled back away from the crowd, her vision blurring with unshed tears. She pushed through a set of double doors and found herself on a cold, deserted balcony overlooking the city. The glittering lights of the skyline mocked her. She had given that man the best years of her life, her energy, her dreams. In return, he had erased her from his story, recasting her as a footnote in his grand epic. Leaning against the cold stone balustrade with the sounds of his triumph echoing behind her, Olivia Adler felt a profound and terrifying emptiness. She wasn't just heartbroken, she was utterly and completely erased. The weeks following the gala bled into a monotonous gray. Olivia's life settled into a rhythm of quiet desperation. Wake up in the too-small apartment that smelled faintly of her predecessor's cat. Endure the long commute on a crowded train. Spend 8 hours drafting uninspired designs under the fluorescent hum of her office. Commute home. Eat a microwave dinner for one. Sleep. Repeat. The vibrant colors of her life with Preston had been replaced with a stark, unforgiving monochrome. She actively avoided any news of him and Brenda, unsubscribing from business journals and muting mutual acquaintances on social media. Yet their success seemed to seep through the cracks of her carefully constructed defenses, a headline on a newsstand, a snippet of conversation from the cubicle next to hers. Each mention was a fresh twist of the knife. Her only refuge was her weekly dinner with her best friend Jessica Chen, a sharp-witted journalist who had seen Olivia through the worst of the divorce. "You need to get angry, Liv," Jessica said one evening, stabbing a piece of kung pao chicken with unnecessary force. "Grief is a phase. Right now, you're just letting him live rent-free in your head while he's redecorating his penthouse with that she-devil." "I'm not sad anymore," Olivia lied, pushing a stray noodle around her plate. "I'm just tired." "That's the same thing, just with better PR." Jessica shot back. "You gave him everything. You deserve to be furious." But Olivia couldn't summon the energy for fury. All she felt was a hollow ache, a sense of worthlessness that Preston had so expertly instilled in her. It was on a particularly bleak Tuesday, with rain lashing against her apartment window, that it arrived. Tucked between a credit card offer and a utility bill was a thick cream-colored envelope. It felt heavy, important. The return address was not a name but a crest, an embossed emblem of a stylized bee intertwined with an oak tree. Beneath it were the words "Davies and Associates Attorneys at Law, Bowmont Tower, Geneva, Switzerland." Olivia stared at it bewildered. She knew no one in Switzerland. She had no business with any high-powered law firm. Her first thought was that it was a mistake. Her second, more cynical thought was that it was some kind of elaborate scam. Perhaps Preston had sold her information to mailing lists, and this was the bizarre result. She almost threw it away, but something about the quality of the paper, the crispness of the type, made her hesitate. With a sense of weary curiosity, she sliced it open with a kitchen knife. The letter inside was printed on the same heavy stock. The language was formal, almost archaic. Dear Ms. Adler, this correspondence concerns a matter of the utmost urgency and confidentiality pertaining to the estate of our late client, Mr. Jonathan Bowmont. We have made numerous attempts to locate you and believe with a high degree of certainty that you are the sole surviving heir we have been searching for. It is imperative that you contact our senior partner, Mr. Alistair Davies, at your earliest possible convenience to arrange a meeting. We understand this news may be unexpected. Please be assured of the legitimacy of this communication. A prepaid first-class airline ticket for travel to Geneva has been arranged on your behalf, details of which can be accessed via the enclosed secure reference number. We await your prompt response. Sincerely, Alistair Davies, Senior Partner, Davies & Associates. Olivia read it once, then twice. Jonathan Bowmont. The name meant nothing to her. Sole surviving heir. It had to be a joke. Her family history was painfully simple. Her father, a kind but perpetually struggling artist, had died when she was a teenager. Her mother had passed away from an illness 5 years before that. Both were orphans with no known relatives. She was, as far as she knew, completely alone in the world. This letter felt like something out of a Victorian novel, not a Tuesday in her drab city life. A prepaid ticket to Geneva. The whole thing screamed, scam. They'd probably ask for her bank details to process the inheritance, and then drain her meager savings account. She tossed the letter onto her small kitchen counter next to a stack of unpaid bills. For the rest of the evening she tried to ignore it, but it sat there, a creamy rectangle of impossibility, drawing her eye. Who was Jonathan Bowmont? Why would a Swiss law firm be searching for her? The next day she brought the letter to dinner with Jessica. Her friend, a natural skeptic thanks to her profession, read it with a focused intensity. Olivia expected her to laugh it off to confirm her suspicions of a scam. Instead, Jessica folded the letter carefully and placed it on the table. Liv, this is real. What? No, it's not. It's crazy, Olivia said. Look at the letterhead, Jessica said, pointing. The watermarked paper, the embossed seal. This is bespoke stationery that costs a fortune. Scammers use photocopies and fake email addresses. They don't use letterpress and couriers. But the name, Bowmont, it doesn't mean anything to me. Did your mother ever talk about her family? Jessica asked gently. Olivia shook her head. No, never. She always said she was alone, that her parents died when she was very young. It was a sensitive subject. I learned not to ask. Jessica's journalistic instincts were firing on all cylinders. Okay, let's think about this. A reclusive, wealthy client. A search for a long-lost heir. A mother with a mysterious past. This isn't a scam, Liv. This is a story. She pulled out her phone. Davies & Associates, Geneva. A few seconds of furious typing and she turned the screen to Olivia. The law firm was not just real. It was one of the most prestigious and discreet private wealth management firms in the world. Their client list was rumored to include old European royalty and tech billionaires. Bowmont Tower was a real gleaming skyscraper on the shores of Lake Geneva. And look at this, Jessica said, her eyes wide as she scrolled through a series of older financial articles. Jonathan Bowmont. He was a legend. An industrialist and investor. Hugely powerful in the 70s and 80s. Became a complete recluse about 30 years ago. Nicknamed the Phantom of the Alps. He was notoriously private. No one has seen a photo of him in decades. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture so outlandish that Olivia could hardly comprehend it. A reclusive billionaire, a mother who never spoke of her past. A life of quiet struggle. Could they all be connected? What if... Olivia started, her voice barely a whisper. What if my mother ran away? What if she was disowned for marrying your father, a poor artist? Jessica finished, her voice full of awe. Liv, this is life-changing. You have to call them. You have to go to Geneva. The thought was terrifying. It meant stepping out of the gray, predictable world she knew into a complete unknown. It meant entertaining a hope so wild it felt dangerous. Hope was a commodity she couldn't afford right now. Failure to manage expectations was what had led her to Preston, and she wouldn't make that mistake again. But as she looked at the letter at the powerful, confident crest of the oak tree, a tiny, forgotten spark of defiance flickered within her. Preston and Brenda had tried to make her feel small, worthless, like a footnote in their story. What if she wasn't a footnote? What if she was the whole damn story? Taking a deep, shaky breath, Olivia Adler made a decision. She was going to Geneva. The flight to Geneva was a surreal experience. Olivia, who had only ever flown economy for a single vacation to Mexico, was now seated in a first-class cabin that was larger than her bedroom. She was served champagne she couldn't pronounce and food on actual porcelain. It felt like a dream she was afraid to wake up from, a fleeting taste of a life that couldn't possibly be hers. With every mile that passed, the absurdity of her situation grew. She was a drafter from a no-name firm flying to meet with legendary lawyers about a billionaire she'd never heard of. It was madness. Geneva was pristine, an oil painting of old-world elegance and modern precision. A silent driver holding a sign with her name met her at the airport and whisked her away in a sleek black sedan. They drove along the edge of the lake past luxury watch boutiques and private banks before pulling up to Bowmont Tower. It was a monument of steel and glass that pierced the clouds, a testament to immense power and wealth. Her heart pounded in her chest as she rode the silent, high-speed elevator to the penthouse floor, which housed the exclusive offices of Davies & Associates. The reception area was less of an office and more of a private museum, with hushed carpets, dark wood paneling, and original modern art on the walls. A severe-looking woman led her to a pair of enormous oak doors. "Mr. Davies will see you now." Alistair Davies was an older gentleman impeccably dressed in a tailored suit with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through her. He rose from behind a desk the size of a small car and extended a hand. His office had a panoramic view of the lake and the jet dough. "Ms. Adler, thank you for coming on such short notice. I am Alistair Davies. Please have a seat." His English was perfect, with a faint, unplaceable European accent. Olivia sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The simple navy blazer and slacks she'd thought were professional now felt hopelessly inadequate. "I assume you have many questions," Mr. Davies began, getting straight to the point. "You could say that," Olivia said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Your letter was a shock. I don't know anyone named Jonathan Bowmont." Mr. Davies slid a leather-bound folder across the polished desk. He opened it to the first page, which held a black-and-white photograph of a young, smiling woman with familiar eyes. Olivia gasped. "That's my mother." "Indeed." "That is Elizabeth Bowmont, taken shortly before she left her home at the age of 19, Davies confirmed. "Your mother, Ms. Adler." He then proceeded to lay out the story, his tone calm and factual, as if he were explaining a corporate merger and not rewriting the entire history of her life. Jonathan Bowmont was her maternal grandfather. He was a brilliant but fiercely controlling man who had built a global empire from nothing. His only child, Elizabeth, was the light of his life, but he had a specific path laid out for her. A marriage to the son of another industrial titan, a life cementing the Bowmont dynasty. But Elizabeth had fallen in love with a young, penniless American art student, Olivia's father. When she told her father she intended to marry him, he had forbidden it. An explosive argument had ensued. Jonathan had given her an ultimatum: the man she loved or her family and fortune. Elizabeth, young and defiant, chose love. She left in the middle of the night with nothing but a small suitcase, severing all ties. She changed her last name to her husband's, moved to America, and never looked back, so determined to protect her new life from her father's influence that she erased her past completely. Your grandfather, Davies, continued, his expression softening slightly, was a man of immense pride. But his anger eventually faded, replaced by a profound regret. He began searching for your mother about 15 years ago. By the time our investigators found a trace of her, we learned that both she and your father had already passed away. The trail then led us to you. It has been a long and difficult search, Ms. Adler. Olivia felt a wave of dizziness. Her mother, who had clipped coupons and worked 2 jobs, was the heiress to a fortune? The narrative of her life, a simple story of love and loss, was a lie, or at least a heavily edited version. My grandfather. Your letter said he was your late client. Olivia said, the word catching in her throat. Yes. Mr. Bowmont passed away peacefully 2 months ago at the age of 94, Davies said. He spent his final years consumed with the need to right his past wrongs. He amended his will accordingly. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. Ms. Adler. Olivia. Jonathan Bowmont left his entire estate to you. Olivia stared at him blankly. His entire estate. That is correct. Bowmont Enterprises. His global portfolio of real estate, his art collection, his liquid assets. You are his sole heir. I don't understand. How much are we talking about? She asked the question, feeling foolish and small in the face of such a revelation. Mr. Davies didn't flinch. He slid another document towards her. It was a summary of assets. The numbers were so long they looked like telephone numbers. She saw the word billion repeated several times. Her eyes scanned the page, but her brain refused to process the figures. It was an astronomical sum, a fortune that could alter nations, let alone the life of a single heartbroken woman. She felt the room tilt. She wasn't just wealthy. She was one of the wealthiest women in the world. However, Mr. Davies said, his voice pulling her back from the brink of fainting, there is a condition. A rather significant one. Of course there was. It couldn't be that simple. Your grandfather, while determined to make you his heir, was also a pragmatist. He did not know you. He could not simply hand over control of a global corporation to a complete stranger, even if she was his blood. His will stipulates a probationary period. Probationary. For 1 year, you will assume a position on the board of Bowmont Enterprises. The company is currently managed by a very capable CEO and a board of directors, some of whom are other family members. Other family members, I thought I was the sole heir. Distant cousins, Davies clarified. Your grandfather's nephew and niece, Jeffrey and Camilla Bowmont. They have managed a subsidiary of the company for years and have long expected to inherit the bulk of the estate. They are displeased by this development. They will be watching you very closely. The trap was set. What do I have to do? Olivia asked. You have to learn, Davies said simply. You have to understand the business, prove your competence, and earn the respect of the board. At the end of the year, the board, including Jeffrey and Camilla, will vote on whether to ratify your position as the new chairwoman and grant you full, unequivocal control of the Bowmont Trust. If you fail to secure their confidence, what happens if I fail? Then the estate's assets will be liquidated and donated to a list of international charities selected by your grandfather. You would be left with a generous but comparatively small trust fund, enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life, but you would have no control over the Bowmont legacy. Olivia's mind was reeling. A year. She had 1 year to go from an architectural drafter to a corporate titan, all while being scrutinized by resentful relatives ready to see her fail. It was an impossible task. The old Olivia, the one who had walked into that gala 2 months ago, would have run screaming from the room. She would have taken the small trust fund and disappeared. But something had changed in her. The humiliation she had suffered at Preston's hands had burned away her naivete. It had left behind a core of hardened steel she didn't know she possessed. Preston had told her she was a cheerleader on the sidelines. Her grandfather, a man she'd never met, was giving her a chance to own the entire stadium. She looked out the window at the city below, at a world of power and influence she never dreamed she could be a part of. This wasn't just about money. It was about legacy. It was about proving to herself and to the ghosts of her past that she was more than what Preston had made her feel. She turned back to Mr. Davies, her expression no longer one of shock, but of quiet, unshakable resolve. When do I start? The transition from Olivia Adler architectural drafter to Olivia Adler probationary board member of a multi-billion-dollar empire was less of a gentle slope and more of a vertical cliff face. Mr. Davies became her Virgil, guiding her through the inferno of high finance. She moved out of her cramped apartment and into a sleek, minimalist penthouse suite at the top of a Bowmont-owned hotel, a temporary residence that came with a staff and a view that made the entire city look like a toy set. Her first few weeks were a relentless boot camp. Her days were filled with tutors. A retired economics professor from Cambridge taught her macroeconomics. A sharp, fast-talking Wall Street veteran taught her portfolio management and market analysis. A prim and proper etiquette coach taught her how to navigate the complex social codes of the ultra-wealthy. Her nights were spent poring over financial reports, corporate histories, and shareholder briefings until the words swam before her eyes. The sheer scale of Bowmont Enterprises was staggering. It wasn't one company. It was a hydra-headed conglomerate with interests in sustainable technology, pharmaceuticals, luxury real estate, and private equity. It was a global force, and she was expected to understand its every moving part. Her first board meeting was a trial by fire. She walked into the cavernous boardroom in Geneva, a room dominated by a table of polished obsidian, feeling like an imposter in her new custom-tailored business suit. The CEO, a capable and unflappable man named Robert Chen, greeted her with professional courtesy. The other board members, seasoned executives from around the world, watched her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. And then there were Jeffrey and Camilla Bowmont. Jeffrey was a portly man in his late 50s with a florid face and an air of perpetual entitlement. Camilla, his sister, was thin and severe, with eyes that missed nothing and a smile that never reached them. They represented the old guard, the family members who had been waiting in the wings for decades. The arrival of an unknown granddaughter from America was not just a surprise, it was an insult. Ms. Adler Jeffrey began, his voice oozing false cordiality as the meeting started. "A pleasure to finally meet you. We were all so shocked to learn of your existence. A delightful little family secret." Camilla added, "Indeed, I must confess we're all rather curious. What exactly is your background? My uncle's file on you was rather thin. Something in construction, was it?" She said the word construction as if it were something one might find on the bottom of a shoe. Olivia felt a flush of her old insecurity, but she met their condescending gazes head-on. She had prepared for this with Mr. Davies. "My background is in architecture and design," Olivia said, her voice clear and calm. "I specialize in structural integrity and spatial efficiency. I find it's not so different from analyzing a company. You look for a solid foundation, check for stress points, and ensure the entire structure is designed for sustainable growth." The answer was unexpected, and a few of the other board members exchanged impressed glances. Jeffrey and Camilla merely looked annoyed. Throughout the meeting, they peppered her with pointed questions using jargon and acronyms designed to trip her up. But Olivia, thanks to her grueling weeks of study, was able to follow along, asking intelligent, if basic, questions. She didn't pretend to be an expert. She positioned herself as a dedicated student, which to her surprise earned her a measure of grudging respect from the non-family members of the board. After the meeting, Mr. Davies gave her a rare approving nod. "You held your own. They expected a frightened little girl. You did not give them one." But Olivia knew this was just the beginning. To truly prove herself, she needed to do more than just study. She needed to act. An opportunity soon presented itself, one that unexpectedly connected her new life with her old. Mr. Henderson, her old boss, called her in a panic. His small firm, Henderson & Associates, was the target of a hostile takeover. A mid-sized private equity firm, Montgomery Capital, was buying up their debt and trying to force a sale. The plan was to absorb their client list and then dissolve the company, leaving 24 employees jobless. The name hit Olivia like a physical blow. Montgomery Capital. It was Preston's firm, the firm she had helped him dream up. He was a piranha swallowing up smaller fish to fuel his own growth. Her old colleagues, the people she had worked with for years, were about to be casualties of his ambition. The old Olivia would have felt helpless. The new Olivia saw an opportunity. She spent 2 days with her finance tutors analyzing Henderson's company from every angle. It was small, but had a solid reputation, and more importantly, a new division focused on eco-friendly urban planning, an area Olivia was passionate about and knew was undervalued. Preston was only seeing the firm's current modest profits. He was blind to its future potential. She went to Mr. Davies. "I want to make my first move," she said. She laid out her proposal. She wouldn't use Bowmont Enterprises' name directly. Instead, she would use a small pre-existing Bowmont subsidiary, a venture capital fund specializing in green tech, to act. The plan was twofold. First, the fund would buy out all of Henderson & Associates' debt from the various creditors before Preston could consolidate it. Second, it would make a significant equity investment in the firm, giving it the capital to expand its sustainable design division and fight off any further takeover attempts. It was a strategic investment that aligned perfectly with the Bowmont portfolio, but it was also deeply personal. Mr. Davies listened intently, a poker face firmly in place. When she finished, he looked at her for a long moment. "This is clever and aggressive. You would be blocking your ex-husband's business deal." "It's not about him," Olivia said, and was surprised to find she meant it. "This is a good investment. The firm has potential that he's too short-sighted to see, and it protects the jobs of good people. It's a sound business decision that also happens to be the right thing to do." A corner of Mr. Davies' mouth twitched into something that might have been a smile. "Your grandfather would have approved of the strategy. He would have been less concerned with the morality." He made a call. The next day the plan was set in motion. The transaction was swift and silent. One by one the debt holders sold to Olivia's subsidiary. Mr. Henderson was informed that a new benevolent investor had saved his company and was funding its future. He had no idea it was Olivia. Meanwhile, in another city, Preston Montgomery was likely fuming, his easy conquest having inexplicably vanished from his grasp. He wouldn't know who had outmaneuvered him, only that a more powerful unseen player had entered the game. Sitting in her penthouse looking over the city, Olivia felt a surge of power that had nothing to do with the money. It was the feeling of competence, the feeling of taking a broken situation and fixing it. She hadn't just learned the language of this new world, she was starting to speak it. And she was beginning to suspect that she was very, very good at it. The cheerleader had just bought the team. 3 months passed. Olivia immersed herself in her new role, traveling the globe to visit Bowmont's various holdings. She walked the floors of pharmaceutical labs in Germany, toured sustainable real estate developments in Singapore, and sat in on strategy sessions in New York. She was a sponge absorbing everything. Her confidence grew with her knowledge. She began to speak up more in board meetings, offering insights from her unique architectural perspective that the finance-brained executives had never considered. Camilla and Jeffrey continued their campaign of subtle condescension, but it was beginning to lose its sting. The other board members were starting to see her not as an interloper, but as an asset. The inevitable collision with her past happened in a glass-walled boardroom on the 50th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper. Bowmont Enterprises was in the final stages of acquiring a groundbreaking robotics startup called Synapse Dynamics. It was a major strategic move into AI, and Olivia had been a vocal champion of the deal. On the day the final papers were to be signed, however, a complication arose. A smaller, aggressive private equity firm had launched a last-minute long-shot competing bid, forcing a face-to-face meeting with Synapse's board. Olivia, along with Robert Chen, the CEO, and 2 of Bowmont's top lawyers, walked into the meeting room. The Synapse team was already seated, and on the other side of the table, representing the competing bidders, were 2 figures who made the blood freeze in her veins: Preston Montgomery and Brenda Finch. For a moment, the world seemed to slow down. Olivia could hear the frantic beat of her own heart. Preston was in the middle of a confident laugh with one of the Synapse board members. He looked up as the Bowmont team entered, his smile ready, his hand outstretched. His eyes met Robert Chen's, then moved to the woman standing beside him. His smile didn't just falter, it evaporated. The color drained from his face. His hand, which had been extended for a handshake, hung awkwardly in the air. He looked at Olivia as if he were seeing a ghost in a $4,000 power suit. Brenda's reaction was even more pronounced. Her perfectly made-up face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Her jaw literally dropped. The pen in her hand clattered onto the polished mahogany table. Olivia, however, felt a strange, icy calm settle over her. All those nights studying all those challenges from her cousins, all the pressure, it had forged something new inside her. She held Preston's gaze for a heartbeat, offering no recognition, no flicker of their shared past. Then she coolly looked away, turning her attention to the head of the Synapse board. "Good morning, Mr. Webb," she said, her voice even and professional. "I am Olivia Adler from the Bowmont board. Thank you for accommodating this meeting." The name Adler didn't register with Preston. He had only ever known her as Olivia Montgomery. But Bowmont, the name hung in the air like a thunderclap. The meeting began and the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Preston was completely off his game. He stumbled over his opening remarks, his usual slick presentation reduced to a series of nervous platitudes. He kept glancing at Olivia, his mind clearly racing, trying to solve an impossible equation. How was the timid little drafter he'd discarded sitting at the table with one of the most powerful private corporations in the world? Brenda, after her initial shock, tried to recover. She jumped in, attempting to steer their presentation back on track, but her voice was a little too sharp, her smile a little too brittle. She looked at Olivia with a venomous jealousy that was almost palpable. When it was Beaumont's turn, Robert Chen laid out their offer, a comprehensive long-term strategic partnership that promised not just capital, but access to Beaumont's global research and distribution networks. Then he turned to Olivia. "Ms. Adler has been the driving force behind our interest in Synapse. Perhaps she could share her vision for your technology." This was it, the moment she had been unknowingly preparing for. She stood feeling the eyes of everyone in the room on her, especially Preston's. "Mr. Webb," she began, her voice resonating with a quiet confidence she never knew she possessed. "Montgomery Capital sees Synapse as an asset to be acquired, leveraged, and likely sold for a profit in 5 years. They are financiers. They see a balance sheet." She saw Preston flinch at the directness of her attack. "We at Bowmont see something different. We see a future. My background is in design and structure. I see the bones of things. And Synapse's AI isn't just a product. It's a foundational technology. We don't want to buy you. We want to build with you. We envision your robotics integrated into our automated pharmaceutical labs, your predictive AI optimizing our sustainable urban developments. We offer not an exit strategy, but a legacy." She spoke for 10 minutes, her arguments clear, insightful, and passionate. She laid out a detailed decade-long vision that was so far beyond Preston's simple financial bid that it made his offer look amateurish and predatory. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Mr. Webb and his board were visibly impressed. Preston, desperate to regain control, jumped in. "That's a very romantic vision, Ms. Adler," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, trying to re-establish their old dynamic. "But in the real world, business is about numbers. Our offer is solid, liquid, and immediate." He tried to use her old last name, a slip of the tongue that was both a mistake and a power play. "Ms. Adler, perhaps you're not familiar with the pressures of this market." Olivia didn't even look at him. She addressed her comments to Mr. Webb. "Some people can only see the price of things, not their value. We believe Synapse's value is immeasurable, and we are prepared to invest in it for the long term. Our offer reflects that." The meeting concluded shortly after. As they were packing their briefcases, Preston cornered her by the door while Brenda watched from a distance, her arms crossed. "Olivia," he hissed, his voice low and urgent. "What is this? What the hell is going on? She finally turned to face him, her expression as placid as a frozen lake. I'm not sure I understand the question, Mr. Montgomery. Don't play dumb with me, Bowmont. How my family has been in business for quite some time, she said, the statement both true and intentionally evasive. His face cycled through confusion, then dawning greedy realization. Your family, you come from money. You never told me. The sheer audacity of it, the immediate assumption that she had hidden wealth from him, was almost comical. The things you don't know about me could fill a library. Preston, she said softly. She then looked past him at Brenda, who was glaring daggers at her. Olivia offered her a tiny, dismissive smile. It was a pleasure competing with you, she said, the words a master class in professional dismissal. I'm sure we'll see each other around. She walked out of the boardroom, leaving Preston and Brenda standing amidst the wreckage of their failed bid, staring after a woman they thought they knew, a woman who had just dismantled them without even raising her voice. The cheerleader hadn't just bought the team. She had just beaten the star quarterback at his own game on his own field. And she knew with chilling certainty that this was only the beginning. The Synapse Dynamics deal closed in Beaumont's favor a week later. The victory was sweet not because she had beaten Preston, but because she had won on her own merits. The win solidified her standing with the board, and even Jeffrey and Camilla's snide remarks became less frequent. They now watched her with a wary resentment rather than open disdain. But Olivia's analytical mind couldn't let go of a detail from the failed bid. Preston's offer for Synapse had been recklessly high, almost desperately so. It was an all-cash offer that for a firm of his size would have represented a massive financial stretch. It wasn't ambitious, it was foolish. Why was he gambling so aggressively? Driven by a mix of professional curiosity and a lingering sense of self-preservation, she decided to dig deeper. She now had the vast resources of Bowmont Enterprises at her disposal. She made a quiet request to Beaumont's internal corporate intelligence division, a team of forensic accountants and analysts who could uncover the financial secrets of entire nations. I want a full deep dive workup on Montgomery Capital, she told the division head. Everything. Debt structure, investment vehicles, cash flow, key partners. I want to see their entire house of cards. While the investigation hummed along in the background, Olivia had to deal with a more immediate threat. Camilla and Jeffrey, seeing their chances of ousting her dwindle, decided to play their final, dirtiest card. A story suddenly appeared in a notorious European tabloid syndicated online across the world. The headline was Salacious Billionaire's Secret Granddaughter, a Chambermaid's Child, the battle for the Bowmont fortune turns ugly. The article, filled with anonymous family sources, painted Olivia as a grasping opportunist. It fabricated a story that her father was not a poor artist, but a hotel porter with whom her mother had a scandalous affair. It claimed Olivia had known about her connection to the Beaumonts for years and had orchestrated a scheme to swindle the true heirs. It was a vile classist attack designed to paint her as illegitimate, unworthy, and a fraud. The blow was personal and public. Her phone lit up with calls from Mr. Davies and the Bowmont PR team. The board was in an uproar. Camilla and Jeffrey feigned outrage. This is a disgusting attack on our family's integrity, Jeffrey boomed in an emergency conference call. We must find the source of these lies. Olivia knew with absolute certainty that the source was on that call. But she had no proof. For the first time, she felt the immense pressure of her position. The world was watching. Her family was trying to destroy her. She didn't crumble. She got to work. She called Jessica Chen not as a friend, but as a professional. Jess, I need a journalist, the best. I need to trace the source of a story, and I need to do it quietly. Jessica, fiercely loyal, mobilized her network. Within 48 hours, she had a name, a freelance gossip columnist known for taking cash for stories. A little more digging, facilitated by a Bowmont security consultant, uncovered a series of encrypted messages and an offshore wire transfer. The money had been funneled through a shell corporation, but the trail ultimately led back to a holding company owned by Jeffrey Bowmont. It was the smoking gun. Armed with this evidence, Olivia didn't go to the press. She went to the board. In a closed-door emergency session, she presented her findings calmly and methodically: the digital trail, the financial records, the irrefutable link to her cousins. The silence in the room was absolute. Camilla's face was ashen. Jeffrey was sweating profusely, his florid face turning a shade of purple. They had been caught, their petty, vicious scheme laid bare. This was not a business disagreement. Olivia said, her voice low but carrying the weight of command. This was an attempt to destroy my reputation and destabilize this company for personal gain. This is a betrayal not just of me but of my grandfather's legacy and the duty we all have to this board. The vote was unanimous. Jeffrey and Camilla Bowmont were stripped of their board seats and their executive positions effective immediately. They were escorted from the building by security, their decades of scheming ending not with a bang, but with a quiet, humiliating walk of shame. Just as the dust was settling on her internal victory, the head of corporate intelligence delivered his report on Montgomery Capital. It was far worse than Olivia could have imagined. Preston's firm was not just over-leveraged, it was a fraud. He had built his success on a sophisticated Ponzi scheme. He used massive influxes of cash from new investors to pay off earlier ones, all while reporting inflated imaginary profits. The entire enterprise was hollow. He funneled millions into offshore accounts to fund his and Brenda's lavish lifestyle. The penthouse, the sports cars, the designer clothes, the very ring on her finger were all paid for with stolen money. The report concluded that Montgomery Capital was on the verge of collapse. The desperate all-cash offer for Synapse Dynamics had been a last-ditch effort to acquire a legitimate high-value asset that could be used as collateral to secure more funding and keep the scheme alive for another cycle. If he had won that deal, he would have sucked Synapse dry and destroyed it. Olivia hadn't just outmaneuvered him, she had inadvertently saved an innocent company from his parasitic grasp. Staring at the report, Olivia felt a cold clarity. This was bigger than their personal history. Preston wasn't just an arrogant ex-husband, he was a criminal who had defrauded dozens of investors, many of whom were pension funds and retirement accounts. He was ruining innocent people's lives. She thought about the humiliation he had put her through, the condescending smirks, the casual cruelty. She could, with a single phone call, leak the report to the financial press and watch his empire burn. It would be the ultimate revenge. But as she looked out at the city from her grandfather's office, she realized revenge was too small a motive. This was about justice. It was about responsibility. Her grandfather hadn't just left her his money. He had left her his power, and power was a burden as much as it was a privilege. She picked up the phone, but she didn't call a journalist. She called Mr. Davies. "Alistair," she said, her voice firm with resolve. "I need you to arrange a meeting for me with the Securities and Exchange Commission." She wasn't just going to watch his house of cards fall. She was going to be the one to push it over. The stage for the final act was fittingly another charity gala. This time, it was the prestigious Children's Hospital Foundation Ball, an event where the city's old money and new tech titans mingled. Bowmont Enterprises was the lead sponsor, and as the newly consolidated power on the board, Olivia was expected to give the opening address. She stood backstage, elegant in a deep emerald gown, a stark contrast to the simple navy dress she had worn to the gala that had started it all. She was no longer the invisible woman shrinking in the corner. She was the center of gravity in the room. Out in the ballroom, Preston and Brenda were making their rounds. To the outside world, they were still the golden couple. News of their failed Synapse bid had been a minor setback, but Preston, a master of spin, had brushed it off as a strategic retreat. They had no idea that federal investigators, armed with the meticulously detailed dossier Olivia had provided, had spent the last 2 weeks building an ironclad case against Montgomery Capital. They had no idea that their world was about to end. Olivia watched them on a monitor. Preston was holding court, a glass of champagne in his hand, laughing his confident laugh. Brenda stood beside him, preening under the admiring gazes, her diamond ring flashing under the chandeliers. They were performing their success, oblivious to the fact that the curtain was about to come down. It was time. Olivia walked onto the stage to a round of warm applause. She approached the podium, her gaze sweeping across the sea of faces. She saw Preston look up at her, a flicker of something, annoyance, resentment in his eyes. She began her speech not with platitudes about charity, but with a story about her grandfather. She spoke of his belief that true wealth wasn't about accumulation, but about building things that last: companies, communities, and most importantly, trust. Trust, she said. Her eyes finding Preston's in the crowd, is the bedrock of everything we do, in business and in life. It is a fragile thing, easily broken. And when it is broken, not for reasons of failure or misfortune, but through deliberate deception, the damage can be catastrophic. A subtle shift occurred in the room. This was not the standard fundraising speech. As she spoke, two well-dressed but stern-looking men entered the ballroom from a side entrance, followed by two more. They moved quietly, professionally, their eyes scanning the room. They were not guests. Olivia continued, her voice steady. There are those who build their empires on foundations of integrity. And there are those who build houses of cards, dazzling illusions designed to fool the world, propped up by deceit. But a house of cards, no matter how grand, can never withstand the slightest breeze of truth. Preston's smile was gone. He was looking at the men now, a dawning horror on his face. Brenda, sensing the change in his demeanor, looked from him to the agents, her expression turning from smugness to confusion. The agents were moving towards their table. Tonight we are here to support an institution built on trust and care, Olivia said, her voice rising with finality. Let us be reminded that our community is only as strong as its most honest members, and let us have the courage to hold accountable those who would tear it down for their own selfish gain. She finished her speech, and the room, sensing the undercurrent of immense drama, responded with thunderous applause. But Olivia's attention, and everyone else's, was now on Preston's table. One of the agents leaned down and spoke quietly to Preston. Mr. Preston Montgomery, I'm Agent Miller with the SEC Enforcement Division. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. Please come with us. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Phones were instantly raised, recording the scene. Brenda let out a small, strangled cry, stumbling back from the table as if Preston were suddenly contagious. Preston's face was a mask of disbelief and fury. This is ridiculous. It's a mistake, he blustered, but there was no conviction in his voice. There's no mistake, sir, the agent said, his voice flat. As they handcuffed him, Preston's wild, panicked eyes found Olivia on the stage. She was standing perfectly still, watching the scene unfold, not with glee or triumph, but with a calm, somber finality. In that moment, he understood. The anonymous competitor who had snatched Henderson's firm. The mysterious power player at the Synapse meeting. The breeze of truth that had just blown over his house of cards. It was all her. He was led out of the ballroom, past the shocked faces of the city's elite, a babbling, pathetic shell of the titan he pretended to be. Brenda stood alone, a pariah in her blood-red dress, the diamond on her finger suddenly looking like a piece of cheap glass. Later that evening, as news of the arrest exploded online, a journalist caught Olivia as she was leaving. Ms. Adler, your speech was incredibly timely. Do you have any comment on the arrest of Preston Montgomery? A man sources say you have a personal history with Olivia. Looked into the camera, her expression composed and powerful. Mr. Montgomery's downfall was a result of his own choices. My grandfather's company, Bowmont Enterprises, was made aware of certain financial irregularities, and as is our corporate and ethical duty, we passed that information on to the proper authorities. Our only interest is in maintaining a fair and transparent market for all investors. I have no further comment on my personal history. It was a perfect, devastatingly professional statement. It positioned her not as a vengeful ex-wife, but as a principled corporate leader. A protector of the legacy she now fully controlled. She walked away from the cameras, leaving the frenzy behind. She didn't feel the thrill of revenge she might have once craved. Instead, she felt a quiet sense of peace. The ghosts of her past had been laid to rest not by bitterness, but by her own competence, strength, and integrity. She had not only stepped out of Preston's shadow, she had become a force of nature that cast a shadow of her own, one built not on lies, but on the solid foundation of the Bowmont name, a name she had truly made her own. Olivia Adler's journey from a humiliated ex-wife to a billionaire powerhouse is more than just a revenge story. It's a powerful testament to the strength that lies dormant within us all. It shows that our past does not have to define our future, and that true power isn't found in wealth, but in self-worth, integrity, and the courage to rewrite our own narrative. She didn't just inherit a fortune. She earned her legacy. What did you think of Olivia's incredible transformation? Was her final move against Preston justice or revenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you and discussing every twist and turn of the story. If you were captivated by Olivia's rise from the ashes, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves a story of ultimate triumph. And of course, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our next gripping tale. Thank you for listening.
A quiet suburb, a neatly trimmed lawn, and a secret that threatened to split one family forever. It all began on a stormy night when Mark Anderson, seemingly the perfect husband, let his alluring mistress step into his pregnant wife's bedroom and into her bed. By the time dawn broke, flashing police lights flooded the driveway, and neighbors peered through windows in disbelief. No one could imagine how a once ordinary couple fell into such chaos. But within these walls lay hidden confessions, desperate betrayals, and heart-wrenching choices that would test loyalty, break trust, and leave everyone asking, how could it ever have come to this? Mark Anderson stared at the white picket fence in front of his modest suburban home on the outskirts of Denver, Colorado. The day was sunny, and a light breeze ruffled the neatly manicured lawn. He always took pride in appearances. He liked knowing everything was in its rightful place, reflecting an outward image of success and respectability. His wife Sarah often teased him about his perfectionist streak. In fact, it was one of the things she had found so endearing when they first met back in college. Their romance felt like a fairy tale in the beginning. Long strolls by the campus lake, late-night conversations about hopes and dreams, and shared laughter that echoed through dorm hallways. Mark was diligent, always rechecking his notes and color-coding everything in his backpack, while Sarah was more laid back, bringing a sense of warmth and spontaneity to his otherwise structured world. They graduated together, he with a degree in business administration, she in elementary education. Soon after, they were married on a crisp autumn afternoon, surrounded by family and a few close friends. It seemed they were destined for a happy life, ticking off all the boxes: stable jobs, a well-furnished home, and plans for children. Yet beneath the surface of this idyllic snapshot, a subtle tension had begun to settle in. As the years progressed, Mark found himself increasingly restless, obsessing over career goals, finances, and the desire for more excitement. Sarah noticed changes in him. Little things like how he lingered on his phone too often, or occasionally arrived home late with half-hearted excuses. She was patient, chalking it up to stress. After all, Mark had always been ambitious, and it made sense he might be feeling the pressure at work. When Sarah discovered she was pregnant, Mark's reaction was polite and supportive, though it lacked the unbridled enthusiasm she had expected. He hugged her, whispered reassuring words, but there was a distance in his eyes. Instead of celebrating, she found herself chasing him for each prenatal appointment, reminding him of the baby's progress. The more she tried to draw him in, the more he seemed to drift. She told herself it was a passing phase, that once the baby was born, Mark would realize the beautiful miracle they were about to share. But somewhere deep inside, Sarah felt a pang of worry, a whisper that warned her not all was right. Real trouble took root one evening when Sarah's best friend, Jessica Lee, visited for dinner. Jessica, a sharp-eyed, warm-hearted woman with a knack for reading people, discreetly pulled Sarah aside after noticing Mark's odd behavior. He was jumpy, his laughter forced, and his phone never left his sight. Jessica offered her concerns gently, but Sarah brushed them off, not wanting to believe that the man she'd built a life with might be hiding something. If anything, she blamed Mark's anxious state on the responsibilities piling up. But Mark was in fact drowning in secrets, ones that would threaten the very foundation of his marriage. He knew it, he felt it, yet he couldn't stop what was happening. That was the cruel irony of his situation. The very qualities that had once driven him to be the responsible, overachieving husband were now pushing him to take risks he never dreamed himself capable of. While Sarah napped early in the evenings or read baby manuals in her rocking chair, Mark was scrolling through messages that made his heart pound in anticipation. Messages from a woman who offered him a sense of thrill he hadn't felt in years. Her name was Carla Rodriguez, and she worked in the same office building as Mark, though in a different department. She was witty, confident, and possessed a magnetism that seemed to draw people in effortlessly. Everyone at the office talked about Carla's style, her flamboyant choice of bright pencil skirts, and the way she commanded attention during team presentations. Mark had seen her in passing, but only after being assigned to a joint project had they begun to speak. He'd noticed how she laughed at his jokes, how her eyes locked onto his when they conversed. Slowly their friendly exchanges morphed into stolen glances, then to flirtatious banter over coffee. Carla knew Mark was married. He never hid that. She even knew Sarah was pregnant. But from the moment Carla placed her hand on Mark's arm one evening during overtime, gently brushing against him, he found himself responding. He was at a precipice caught between guilt and a longing to escape from the monotony he blamed on domestic life. Carla, too, was escaping from something her own lonely nights and a string of failed relationships. They provided each other solace, a forbidden escape from their real lives. Their meetings were carefully orchestrated. Mark would fake a late work session or say he was meeting a client. Carla pretended she was staying behind to finish a report. They found dark corners in parking lots, eventually renting cheap motel rooms on the outskirts of town. Each time, Mark was sure guilt would consume him, but it never quite did lust, and adrenaline overshadowed everything. But the affair came at a cost. Mark's finances, once neatly balanced, began to suffer under secretive dinners and gifts for Carla. He found himself withdrawing from Sarah's bank account without telling her, always with the silent reassurance that he'd make it up later. He also neglected small household tasks. Sarah, now 6 months pregnant, found herself climbing step stools to change light bulbs and dragging groceries into the house alone. The tension between husband and wife continued to escalate. Sarah was frustrated and exhausted, but she tried to remain understanding. She never fully admitted to herself that Mark's distance might signify an affair. After all, he'd been loyal and devoted all the years she had known him. It was impossible, unthinkable, to consider he would betray her in such a way, especially now that they were expecting a child. Instead, she believed he was going through a personal crisis, perhaps a fear of fatherhood. Sarah confided in Jessica about her suspicions and her desire to keep the marriage intact, no matter the challenges. Then Mark made a fateful choice one Friday night. While Sarah was away at her mother's house, he invited Carla to dinner at his own home. It was a step too far, and he knew it. But Carla had teased him, saying she wanted to see how he lived. That single curiosity overshadowed every warning bell in Mark's head. He assured himself it was just dinner, just a quick look at the house, and then she'd leave. But the moment Carla stepped through the door, wearing a midnight blue dress that clung to her figure, Mark knew they had crossed a line that could never be erased. Carla marveled at the photos on the mantel, wedding pictures, snapshots of Mark and Sarah at scenic spots around Colorado. Even the ultrasound image pinned on the refrigerator. Despite it all, Carla maintained an air of detachment, as though all these tokens of Mark's married life were mere props. Yet there was a glimmer in her eyes, something like envy. Perhaps a realization that Sarah's existence was painfully real and not just some story Mark told. But she said nothing, and Mark pretended not to notice the flicker of discomfort in his mistress's gaze. After dinner, Mark opened a bottle of wine. Carla drank, swirling the red liquid in her glass, leaning against the kitchen counter, with a playful grin. The tension in the air was palpable. Even Mark, consumed by his infatuation, felt the weight of what he was doing in that moment. If Sarah came home early, if a neighbor saw something, or if Jessica decided to drop by unannounced, everything would come crashing down. But Mark brushed aside the fear and let the night's temptations drown out any lingering decency he once had. By the time Carla left, it was nearly midnight, and Mark was too intoxicated to notice he'd left behind incriminating details. A wine-stained glass on the table, a faint whiff of Carla's perfume on the couch. He cleaned up most of it the next morning, but not everything could be erased. Sarah returned the next day to find Mark unusually jittery. He barely met her eyes when she mentioned her overnight trip, merely offering a distracted smile and a quick peck on her forehead before returning to his laptop. Not one to pry, Sarah decided to let him be. Over the next week, though, she noticed more oddities. A grocery receipt with items she hadn't purchased, a new brand of perfume lingering in the bathroom. Small tears in the living room curtains, as if someone had tugged them aside in haste. Her instincts told her something was off, but each time she tried to confront Mark, he feigned ignorance or brushed off her concerns as pregnancy hormones. Sarah, unwilling to ignite a confrontation, let it slide, though her intuition screamed that she needed to dig deeper. She wondered if she was being paranoid. Jessica urged her to keep her eyes open, but also encouraged her not to jump to conclusions. Sarah's mother, Linda, who was unaware of her son-in-law's changed behavior, simply advised Sarah to rest and not overthink. But the facade was growing thinner by the day. Mark's phone buzzed incessantly with messages he refused to open in Sarah's presence. He hid credit card bills and spent evenings out under vague explanations. Each lie stacked upon the next, forging a precarious tower that threatened to collapse with the slightest shift. By the 7th month of pregnancy, Sarah's frustration peaked. She confronted Mark one evening. When she asked him point blank if there was someone else, he scoffed, calling the very suggestion absurd. He even grew indignant, accusing Sarah of not trusting him after all these years. She apologized, tears stinging her eyes, and retreated to the bedroom with a knot of dread in her stomach. It was only after she heard him slamming cupboards in the kitchen that she realized how truly disconnected they had become. Meanwhile, Carla continued her pursuit of Mark, growing bolder. She sent messages at all hours, demanded more time together, and even hinted at wanting Mark to leave Sarah. Mark, torn between his unborn child and the lust he felt for Carla, found himself buried in stress. Some part of him, however dormant, still cared for Sarah. But he couldn't break off his entanglement with Carla either. He told himself he was trapped in a scenario with no easy escape. Each day felt like stepping on thin ice, hoping it wouldn't crack. That was how things stood when Sarah planned another trip to her mother's place. Linda was having minor surgery, and Sarah wanted to help for a couple of days. Mark recognized an opportunity. He promised Sarah he would manage the house and take care of everything. In reality, he was already anticipating Carla's company. He envisioned an evening free from prying neighbors or suspicious looks. This time it felt thrillingly dangerous. He made a mental note to hide all traces properly. But Mark failed to understand the nature of secrets. They breed bigger lies, deeper guilt, and an inevitable unraveling. And that unraveling was about to accelerate much faster than even Carla anticipated. Carla arrived on a rainy evening. Mark welcomed her with a hesitant smile, but she brushed his concern aside and draped her trench coat over the chair. They shared a meal that Mark had ordered and then settled in the living room. If there was any sense of guilt, Mark buried it beneath the facade of a charming host. Carla, for her part, seemed at ease. She wandered the house, studying family photos, with a critical eye lingering especially on the ultrasound image Sarah had pinned to a corkboard in the hallway. During dinner, Carla revealed a side Mark had rarely seen, a near-obsessive curiosity about his wife's life. She asked about Sarah's routines, her profession, her due date. Mark tried to respond, vaguely uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Carla's eyes sparkled with a strange intensity when she heard that Sarah was in her 3rd trimester, as if calculating how to use this information for her own advantage. After dinner, Mark put away the plates and let Carla roam. She ended up in the master bedroom, admiring the pale blue walls and white curtains that Sarah had painstakingly chosen. The bed was neatly made, and a plush teddy bear, a gift from Sarah's friend Jessica, sat by the pillows. Carla ran her fingers along the comforter, a self-satisfied smirk tugging at her lips. "You're really living a double life, aren't you?" She teased, her tone somewhere between humor and contempt. A loving husband by day, a wild lover by night. Mark winced but mustered a forced grin. He closed the bedroom door behind him, as though trying to keep prying eyes away from the intimacy of this space. Standing next to Carla, he felt a wave of conflicting emotions: excitement, revulsion, guilt, and a strange relief that she was here at all. The evening unfolded slowly, each passing hour, an accumulation of unspoken tensions. Carla had carried an overnight bag with her, just in case, she'd said. Mark convinced himself she would leave before midnight, but as the clock approached 1 a.m., they were still tangled in conversation and half-empty wine glasses. The rainstorm outside battered the windows, making the prospect of driving home unappealing. Carla feigned helplessness. "I can't drive in this. Let me stay over." And with that, a line was crossed. Mark hesitated. Should he set her up in the guest room? Was that too blatant a sign of guilt? But Carla's cunning charm won. She tiptoed into the master bedroom, letting the overhead light cast shadows across her silhouette. Mark, helpless to resist, followed. Outside, the storm raged on, oblivious to the tempest brewing within these walls. Thus Carla ended up sleeping in Sarah's bed. The place where a pregnant wife should have found comfort and rest was now occupied by the woman who had seduced her husband. Mark tossed and turned throughout the night, haunted by the gravity of his betrayal. In fleeting moments of lucidity, he almost leaped out of bed to make Carla leave. But each time he tried, Carla would pull him back with a whisper or a touch, and the swirling mixture of fear and desire imprisoned him. A part of Mark believed he might still keep everything hidden. that come sunrise, Carla would slip away, and he'd erase all traces. Sarah wouldn't be back for another day. He had time to wash the sheets, tidy up the wine glasses, and stash away Carla's belongings. But fate had other plans. Plans that neither Mark nor Carla could have predicted. The next morning, a watery sun struggled to pierce the storm clouds. Mark stirred early groggy and disoriented. Carla was curled up on Sarah's side of the bed, her hair splayed across the pillow. He stared at the ceiling, heart pounding at the thought of all that needed to be done, cleaning, changing sheets, ensuring no neighbor had spotted Carla's car. He tiptoed around the house, picking up her jacket from the living room sofa, gathering wine glasses and disposing of them in the outside trash bin. As he wrestled the trash can to the curb, Mark froze. At the far end of the block, a police cruiser crept around the bend, lights flashing, but sirens off. An immediate jolt of panic shot through his veins. Had something happened to Sarah? Did they come bearing tragic news? He looked around, scanning for any sign of an accident or trouble in the neighborhood. But the cruiser slowly rolled to a stop right in front of his driveway. Two uniformed officers stepped out, Officer Paige Morales and Officer Adam Thompson, both with stern expressions. Mark swallowed hard as they approached. This couldn't possibly be about Carla, right? They wouldn't have any reason to suspect infidelity. Unless Carla had a past Mark knew nothing about. The possibility flickered in his mind, sowing anxiety. He wiped his hands on his jeans, trying to maintain composure. "Good morning," Officer Morales said, tipping her head in greeting. "We received a report about a disturbance in this area early this morning. We're checking to ensure everything's okay." "A disturbance?" Mark repeated, his voice cracking. "Yes. A neighbor reported unusual noises, shouting. Maybe an argument late last night. They also saw a car parked out front that they didn't recognize." Mark's mind raced. His next-door neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, was known for her vigilance, especially at odd hours. Perhaps she had seen Carla arrive or heard them talking. He forced a polite smile. "I'm sorry to trouble you, officer. My wife is out of town, and I was just... Well, I might have had the television too loud last night. No arguments, though. Nothing else going on." Officer Thompson scrutinized Mark's expression. "Is there anyone else in the house with you right now?" "Mr. Anderson?" Mark felt a twist in his gut. A friend stayed over. She was caught in the storm, and..." Before he could finish, Carla emerged in the doorway, barefoot, wearing one of Sarah's robes. The color drained from Mark's face as the officers turned their attention to her. Carla's eyes flicked between them, trying to feign calm, but clearly unsettled by the unexpected arrival of law enforcement. "Good morning," she said, attempting a polite nod. Officer Morales studied Carla's attire, then exchanged a glance with her partner. "And you are..." Carla's response was quick, lacking the usual confidence. "Carla Rodriguez. I'm a colleague of Mark's. He was kind enough to let me crash here because of the storm." An awkward silence followed. The officers seemed unconvinced. Mark's posture stiffened, sweat beading on his forehead. Then Officer Thompson asked if they could step inside to talk further. Mark hesitated, fearing the officers might discover remnants of the affair, but refusing entry might look suspicious. Reluctantly, he led them into the living room, where Carla perched on the edge of the couch, hands clasped in her lap. The questions continued basic inquiries about the alleged disturbance, how Carla ended up here, whether Mark's wife was aware. Each query felt like a jab at Mark's fragile house of lies. He concocted half-truths, carefully sidestepping the real nature of Carla's presence. Meanwhile, Carla remained mostly silent, occasionally offering affirmations to Mark's statements. It seemed the officers weren't entirely convinced, but they had no concrete evidence of any crime. They reminded Mark and Carla to respect neighborhood noise ordinances and to be mindful of suspicious activity. Officer Morales handed Mark her card, suggesting he call if anything came up, her eyes lingering on him, as though warning she wasn't fully buying their story. Just when Mark thought they would leave, Carla's phone rang, blasting a shrill ring through the tense atmosphere. She scrambled to silence it, but Officer Thompson motioned for her to answer. Glancing at the caller ID, Carla paled. She stepped into the next room. Voice low. After the call, Carla re-emerged, looking shaken. Officer Thompson pressed, "Everything all right?" "Ms. Rodriguez." Carla forced a smile. "Just a family matter," she said, but her hands trembled as she tucked her phone away. Sensing the tension, Officer Morales decided to wrap up. She cast one final evaluating look over the scene, then pivoted toward the front door. The moment the officers left, Mark turned to Carla, ready to ask what was happening. But before he could open his mouth, Carla's phone chimed again. Another call. Carla stared at the screen and rejected it, exhaling shakily. "What's going on?" Mark demanded, heart still pounding from the near exposure of their affair. Carla brushed past him, grabbing her jacket and slipping into her shoes. "I have to go. I'm sorry, Mark. I'll explain later." And just like that, she was gone, leaving Mark alone in a house that now felt haunted by the shadows of betrayal and suspicion. Sarah would be home soon, and he had an endless list of cover-ups to manage. But a deeper dread gnawed at him. Carla was clearly entangled in something bigger than he'd ever imagined, and it was only a matter of time before it all caught up to them, before the next knock on the door wouldn't be as benign as a noise complaint. With Carla gone, Mark raced to erase every trace of her presence. He stripped the bed, replacing the sheets with fresh linen. He collected the empty wine bottle and glasses, tossed them in the recycling bin, and opened all the windows to air out the lingering perfume. He vacuumed the living room, wiped down counters, and even mopped the kitchen floor, desperately trying to rid the house of any memory of her. As he worked, his mind replayed the scene with the police officers. He couldn't shake the feeling that Officer Morales and Officer Thompson didn't entirely believe him. Their questions had probed deeper than a simple noise complaint. Yet what choice did Mark have but to lie? Telling the truth would mean forfeiting everything: his marriage, his home, his soon-to-be fatherhood. An hour later, Sarah called to let him know her mother was stable after the minor surgery, and that she'd be returning home by evening. Mark pretended everything was normal, forcing a light-hearted tone as he asked if she needed anything from the store. After he hung up, he crumpled onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. The pit of guilt in his stomach felt bottomless. Was it worth it, this double life, for a fleeting affair that offered excitement, but left him feeling hollow? By mid-afternoon, Mark couldn't ignore his anxiety about Carla. He texted her multiple times. Mark, 1:03 p.m. Are you okay? Mark, 1:10 p.m. Please let me know what's going on. Mark, 2:05 p.m. Carla. I'm worried. The police thing really shook me up. No response. The phone remained silent, each passing minute, feeding Mark's paranoia. He started recalling random details from their time together. Things she'd hinted at, questionable friends, financial troubles. A mention of an ex-boyfriend who was dangerous. He'd never pressed her for details, preferring their relationship remain an escape without real-world burdens. Now he regretted his willful ignorance. By 5 p.m., Mark heard the garage door open. Sarah was home. He hurriedly got up, plastering on a smile, as though he'd spent the day doing mundane chores. She walked in slowly, her baby bump prominent under a loose-fitting dress. She looked exhausted, but relieved to be home. Without a word, she set her bag down and let Mark wrap her in a hug. "How's Mum?" he asked softly. "She's fine," Sarah said. "The surgery went well and she's recovering. I just need some rest." Together they made a simple dinner, Mark fussing over Sarah, trying to be attentive to her needs. She seemed grateful, but also distant, as though sensing something was amiss. As they ate, Sarah looked at him with eyes that flickered between love and suspicion. "Mark, was everything okay here the last couple of days?" "You seem tense," she ventured. He took a sip of water to stall. "Just work stuff," he lied. "Some deadlines?" She nodded and let the subject drop. Mark exhaled. For one brief moment, he believed he might still salvage things if Carla would stay away, if the police never returned, if he could bury this chapter of his life forever. But secrets have a way of resurfacing in the most brutal fashion, and that reckoning was closer than Mark realized. Late that night, while Sarah slept fitfully, her pregnancy making it hard to find a comfortable position, Mark lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The events of the last 24 hours churned in his mind. He reached for his phone on the nightstand, desperately checking if Carla had finally texted him. Nothing. His anxiety climbed. In the dim glow of his bedside lamp, Mark scrolled through social media. He searched Carla's name, rummaging through any clues that might explain her sudden panic. He found her profile inactive, last updated weeks ago. As he scrolled further, he stumbled upon a post from a friend of Carla's referencing a certain mess Carla was in. There were no details, just cryptic comments and concerned replies. Unease prickled through him. He decided to do what he should have done from the beginning, look up Carla Rodriguez in public records. Accessing an online search, he discovered a few results indicating minor legal issues in her past. A DUI charge from years ago, a civil dispute over unpaid rent. Nothing that jumped out as immediately dangerous. Yet Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something heavier was in play. He slept fitfully, waking at dawn to Sarah's gentle stirring. She pressed a hand to her belly and turned to him, blinking in the early morning light. For a moment, they smiled at each other, a brief slice of normalcy. Mark tried to cling to that moment, to pretend they were still the couple who had once laughed on the campus lake. But the outside world wouldn't allow it. As Sarah headed to the shower, Mark's phone buzzed an unknown number. He swallowed hard and answered. "Mark." A voice whispered urgently. "Carla." "Thank God. Where have you been?" Mark scurried out of bed and closed the bedroom door behind him. "I can't talk long," Carla said, her voice hoarse. "I'm in trouble, Mark. I owe money to some people. Dangerous people. The police showed up because they were tipped off about something. It's not about us. Not exactly. But if they connect any dots..." Her voice trailed off. Mark felt his stomach churn. "Carla, what exactly did you do?" A pause. "It's complicated. I made some bad decisions. Now I need a place to stay, just for a few nights. My landlord kicked me out. I have nowhere else to go." Mark braced himself against the wall. No, Carla. You can't come here." "My wife, I have no one else to ask." She pleaded, her tone verging on desperation. "Please, I'll be discreet." I'll stay out of sight. I promise. He closed his eyes, the guilt mixing with dread. Sarah was in her final months of pregnancy, and the last thing he wanted was to endanger her or cause more stress. But Carla's frantic plea tugged at him. In some twisted sense, he felt responsible for her predicament, as if his affair had pushed her to the brink. "Let me think," he muttered finally. "I'll call you back." He ended the call and slumped onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. The drama spiraled further out of control, and with each passing moment, Mark dug himself deeper into a pit of moral compromise. That morning, Sarah left for a routine prenatal checkup. She invited Mark to come along, but he claimed he had an important virtual meeting for work. Guilt gnawed at him as he watched her drive away alone, all while he contemplated how to handle his mistress's precarious situation. He called Carla back and arranged to meet her at a nearby diner, a rundown place that rarely attracted attention. When he arrived, he found her in a corner booth wearing a hoodie, sunglasses perched on her head, her face drawn and tired. She looked up at him with a mixture of relief and shame. "Thank you for meeting me," she murmured. Mark slid into the booth, grimacing at the sticky tabletop. "Tell me what's going on." Carla recounted her story in fragments. She owed a large sum to a local loan shark connected to her ex, and they'd threatened her. She had tried to pay them back, but fell behind. The previous night, she'd gotten a tip that the police had been contacted, perhaps to bring her in for questioning. She believed the noise complaint was a ruse, an attempt to locate her. Mark's head spun. This was more than a simple affair gone awry. Carla was ensnared in a criminal web, and he was now on the periphery of it. "You can't stay at my house," he repeated firmly. "It's too risky. Sarah would kill me." Carla's eyes glistened. "I know I don't deserve your help, but I'm desperate. Just a few nights. I can keep a low profile. If anyone asks, say I'm a friend from work, going through a breakup." Mark thought of Sarah's growing suspicion, the near miss with the police, the unborn child who needed a stable home. Every logical fiber in his being screamed at him to cut Carla off. Yet he felt a twisted sense of responsibility. He'd let Carla into his life. He'd ignored every red flag. Now she was pleading for help, and part of him couldn't bear to leave her in danger. Against all better judgment, he agreed to house her in the guest room for a single night. Carla's eyes brightened with gratitude. Mark cursed himself silently, knowing he was only tightening the noose around his neck. That evening, Mark lied to Sarah again. He said a colleague was in town for business and needed a place to crash for the night. Sarah, although surprised, did not protest. She was preoccupied with back pains and a baby that kicked relentlessly. Besides, Mark had rarely brought colleagues home, so she assumed it was a genuine favor. Carla arrived late, wearing a cap and oversized clothes to avoid recognition. Mark ushered her into the guest room, quickly praying the neighbors wouldn't notice. Sarah was in bed reading a pregnancy book. Mark told her he'd be up soon, then crept to the guest room where Carla lingered by the door. "You have to stay in here," he hissed. "Do not step out unless it's absolutely necessary. Sarah can't see you. She'll recognize you from the police visit." Carla nodded, her eyes downcast. "I understand. Thank you, Mark." He closed the door and returned to the master bedroom. Nerves frayed. Sarah was yawning, complaining of back pain. Mark sat beside her, gently massaging her lower spine in an attempt to soothe her. The moment felt painfully ironic. Here he was tending to his pregnant wife, while his mistress hid in the next room. Every stroke of his hand reminded him how far he'd fallen. That night, Sarah drifted off after some time, but Mark couldn't sleep. He heard every squeak of the floorboards, every rustle of movement from Carla's room. Around midnight, a text arrived on his phone. "I'm so sorry for all this. Carla." He stared at the message, feeling a twinge of pity. After a moment's thought, he tapped out a response. "Just stay put. We'll sort this out tomorrow." Morning dawned bright and tense. Sarah rose early to prepare for a follow-up doctor's appointment. Mark feigned a headache, offering to stay behind just in case his colleague needed help. Sarah seemed unconvinced, suspicion flickering in her gaze, but she gathered her belongings and left anyway. With Sarah gone, Mark hurried to Carla's room, only to find her asleep in a rumpled bed, eyes puffy from crying. He woke her gently, offering coffee. She told him she'd be out of his hair by afternoon, having made some arrangements to lay low at a friend's house. Mark felt relief wash over him. If Carla left for good, he might salvage some semblance of normalcy. But just as Carla was preparing to slip out, a frantic knocking rattled the front door. Mark's heart lodged in his throat. Not again. He peeked out a window. Officer Morales stood on the porch, hand poised to knock again. Turning, he found Carla in the hallway. Terror etched across her face. "Go to the kitchen," he commanded under his breath. "Hide." As Carla disappeared, Mark inhaled sharply and opened the door, forcing a calm smile. "Officer Morales, what brings you here?" She looked at him with a stony expression, stepping forward, prompting him to let her inside. "I need to ask you a few more questions about Carla Rodriguez." Mark's blood ran cold. "Carla, I told you we worked together, and she stayed over because of the storm." Officer Morales nodded slowly. "We have information suggesting Ms. Rodriguez may be involved in illegal activities. There's a possibility she might contact you again, given your relationship. We'd like your cooperation." Swallowing hard, Mark feigned ignorance. "Look, I don't know what Carla's done. I've barely spoken to her since the other day. She hasn't contacted me." The officer gave a half smile that didn't reach her eyes. "If you hear from her, you'll let us know immediately, right?" "Of course," Mark said, managing a nod. Officer Morales seemed unconvinced, but left her card again, instructing him to call if Carla showed up. As she walked out, she let her gaze linger in the foyer, as though sensing someone else's presence. Mark held his breath until she finally exited. Heart racing, he rushed back to the kitchen where Carla was crouched behind the island, eyes wide. "She's on to us," he muttered. "You need to go, right now." Carla stood, her face grim. She slung her bag over her shoulder. "I'll call a taxi." Neither said a word as they hurried to the back door. Carla paused momentarily, turning to Mark with tears brimming. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for all of this. I never wanted to hurt you." Mark nodded, unable to find words. Then, without further ceremony, Carla rushed out the back, disappearing into the alley. Mark closed the door, exhaling a shaky breath. He could almost taste freedom, an escape from the swirling nightmare, if he could manage to keep the police at bay and Sarah unaware. But his relief was premature. For even as Carla vanished from sight, a car pulled into the driveway. Sarah was home early, carrying a bag of groceries. She spotted him at the back door, eyes narrowing with confusion. "Why are you standing there like that?" she asked, stepping into the kitchen. "Who was just here?" Mark's stomach twisted in knots. He searched for an excuse, stumbling over words. Nobody." I was just getting some air. Sarah glanced around suspiciously. Why are you so jumpy, Mark? He forced a smile that crumbled under Sarah's penetrating stare. Her gaze flicked to the back alley, the slight disarray of the kitchen, the traces of a second coffee mug on the counter. She wasn't naive. She knew him too well. And in that charged silence, Mark felt the final threads of his deceit unraveling. The confrontation Mark had dreaded finally erupted. Sarah demanded answers. Who was staying in the guest room? Why did she find a woman's hairbrush in the bathroom? Why was the police officer here? Each question hammered Mark's fragile composure. At first, he attempted to spin more lies, but Sarah's teary gaze and trembling voice shattered his defenses. Something in him finally broke. He confessed haltingly at first, then in a rush of words he couldn't control. He admitted to the affair, Carla's overnight stays, the police involvement. The only part he censored was Carla's criminal entanglements. He simply told Sarah that Carla was in trouble and the police had come around to question them. Sarah, stunned into silence, gripped the countertop as if to steady herself. Her face went pale and her lips parted in disbelief. She said nothing for a long moment, then asked the question that terrified him. Did you let her sleep? In our bed? In the bed where I've been sleeping while carrying your child? Mark wanted to lie, but the weight of his sins was too great. He nodded, unable to meet her eyes. The noise that escaped Sarah's throat sounded like a wounded animal, a strangled cry of agony. She turned away, pressing a hand to her swollen belly as tears streamed down her cheeks. You brought her into our home, into my bed. What kind of monster are you? She spat, voice thick with revulsion. He reached out, but she recoiled. Sarah, I'm sorry, he whispered, but he couldn't find words to justify the unforgivable. Without warning, Sarah's emotions surged, and she slammed her hand against the cupboard. The baby inside her kicked violently, as though sensing her turmoil. Trembling. Sarah stumbled to the living room, sinking onto the couch. Mark followed, guilt etched on his face, but she held up a hand. Stay away, she said. Her voice choked. I need to think. I need to understand how I married someone who could do this to me. He stood there, helpless, wanting nothing more than to console her to undo every wrong decision. But the damage was done. There was no comfort he could offer that would mend the gaping wound in her chest. It was in the midst of this tense standoff that another knock came at the door. 3 hard, distinct raps that echoed through the silent house. Mark closed his eyes, dreading what might come next. Sarah sat upright, alarmed, her tear-streaked face turning toward the tumult entrance. When Mark opened the door, Officer Morales and Officer Thompson stood there again, expressions grave. This time they weren't alone. A plainclothes detective accompanied them, a badge clipped to his belt. Mark's heart dropped. Mr. Anderson, the detective said, voice clipped. May we come in? Mark stepped aside, mind spinning. Sarah, rising from the couch, locked eyes with him, fear and betrayal mingling on her face. The detective introduced himself as Detective James Carter. We've been investigating certain criminal activities involving Carlo Rodriguez, Carter stated, flipping open a small notebook. We have reason to believe she's been using associates, willing or otherwise, to conceal her whereabouts and possibly launder money. We have reason to believe you might have information. Mark's hands shook. I only knew she was in some sort of trouble. She said she owed money. That's all. Detective Carter nodded. She's wanted for questioning related to fraud and conspiracy. We believe she's been leveraging personal relationships to hide assets. Are you aware of any large sums of money being transferred through your accounts, Mr. Anderson? The question hit Mark like a blow to the gut. Instantly, he recalled the times he'd covered Carla's expenses, the secret transfers. At the time, he thought it was just gifts or petty cash. Had she used him for something bigger? No. Mark lied weakly, his voice faltering. I mean, I gave her money for personal emergencies, but not large sums. The detective studied Mark's face. Ms. Rodriguez was reported at this address yesterday. We have statements from a neighbor that a woman matching her description entered your home late at night. Is that correct? Sarah's eyes turned accusatory. She glared at Mark, arms folded protectively over her belly. Mark caught between fear of legal repercussions and shame before his wife nodded slowly. She was here, but she left. Detective Carter flicked through his notes, then addressed Sarah directly. Mrs. Anderson, were you aware that Ms. Rodriguez spent time in your home? Sarah's expression tightened, tears brimming again. I only just found out. She managed her voice laced with bitterness. Carter frowned, turning back to Mark. We'll be checking your financial records. If we find any evidence that you assisted Ms. Rodriguez in illegal activities, you'll be charged as an accomplice. Terror seized Mark. This was far worse than a mere affair exposed. He could face criminal charges. In a panic, he exclaimed, I had no idea. She told me she was in trouble, but I didn't know about any illegal schemes. I was just trying to help. The detective let silence reign for a moment, before nodding to Officer Morales and Officer Thompson. Let's go, he said, handing Mark his card. If Ms. Rodriguez contacts you, call immediately, or there will be consequences. As they left, Sarah sank back onto the couch, trembling. Mark stood in the foyer, the detective's card clutched in his shaking hand. The reality of his actions closed in on him like a suffocating fog. He had betrayed his wife, endangered their child, and now potentially implicated himself in a criminal case. His once perfect life was in ruins, and he had only himself to blame. After the police left, silence descended in the living room. Sarah turned to Mark, tears shimmering in her eyes. He tried to approach, to place a reassuring hand on her shoulder, but she jerked away. I can't do this, Mark, she said. Voice hollow. You lied to me. You let her into our home. You risked our baby's safety. He felt the sting of her words, but any defense he tried to muster sounded weak. He could only say, I'm sorry so many times before it meant nothing. Sarah cradled her belly. I need space. I need to think about how we're going to move forward, if we even can. He wanted to beg for forgiveness, to promise he'd rectify everything. But how could he? The scars were too deep. Sarah rose shakily, gathering her purse and keys. Where are you going? Mark asked, panic welling up in him. To Jessica's, Sarah replied, I need someone I can trust right now. Mark nodded, knowing he had no right to stop her. He watched as she left the door, clicking softly behind her, a symbol of the distance that had grown between them. Alone in the quiet house, Mark felt a wave of despair crash over him. Everything was unraveling, and he wasn't sure there was enough thread left to stitch his life back together. Days passed. Sarah remained with Jessica, avoiding Mark's calls, except for brief updates about her pregnancy. She needed to check in with her doctor regularly, and Mark was sick with worry about her stress levels. He texted her, apologies poured out his remorse in long messages, but rarely received more than a one-word reply. Meanwhile, the police made good on their promise to investigate Mark's finances. They subpoenaed his bank statements and credit card records. He had to retain a lawyer, a tired, middle-aged man named Leonard Price, who took Mark's frantic calls at all hours. Price assured Mark that unless they found direct evidence of large-scale fraud, he'd likely avoid severe charges. But the possibility of an arrest loomed overshadowing every waking moment. Carla, for her part, vanished entirely. Mark heard nothing from her, no texts, no calls. He told the police he hadn't seen her, which was the truth. She had disappeared without a trace. Detective Carter stopped by once more, questioning Mark about specific transactions. Mark tried to explain they were gifts or petty loans, but Carter remained skeptical. Jessica occasionally messaged Mark in Sarah's stead, telling him to stay away until further notice. She informed him that Sarah was safe, but deeply distressed, her blood pressure rising dangerously due to the emotional turmoil. Hearing that Mark felt crippling guilt. He had pledged to love and protect Sarah, and yet he was the one jeopardizing her health and possibly their child's. A week later, the phone rang. Mark answered automatically, half hoping it was Sarah. Instead, Carla's voice crackled on the other end. "Mark, I'm so sorry," she said, sounding frazzled. "I heard the police are looking for me. I can't run forever. I've decided to turn myself in." He sank into a chair, relief and dread warring within him. "That's probably the best thing," he said. "They think I helped you launder money or something. You have to clear this up." She sighed. "I will. Look, I used your accounts to park some funds temporarily. I never meant to drag you down. I just needed a place to hide it. My ex threatened me if I didn't get him the money." Mark's jaw clenched. "Carla, you had no right." "I know," she interrupted. "I've made a mess. I'm going to explain everything to the police, tell them you weren't involved. You deserve that much." Anger flared in Mark, but he also recognized this might be his lifeline, the only way to avoid charges. "Just make sure you do the right thing." Her voice trembled. "I will. I truly did care for you, Mark, in my own selfish way." Before he could respond, she hung up, leaving Mark in stunned silence. He called his lawyer immediately, who advised him to wait for Carla's statement and remain cooperative. That night, Mark received another call, this time from Detective Carter. Carla had turned herself in, and she had indeed explained that Mark was clueless about the fraudulent aspect of her finances. The detective's tone was neutral, but Mark sensed a hint of relief. "You're free from suspicion for now, Mr. Anderson," Carter said. "But we'll verify her statement. If there's any discrepancy, we'll be in touch." When Mark ended the call, he exhaled a long breath of relief. The nightmare might finally be nearing an end, at least on the criminal side. But the personal damage remained gaping and raw. With Carla's arrest and her confession clearing Mark of wrongdoing, the legal nightmare finally eased. Now all Mark could focus on was repairing what truly mattered: his marriage. He reached out to Sarah repeatedly through messages and letters, begging for a chance to talk. After encouragement from Jessica, Sarah agreed to meet him at a quiet cafe. Mark arrived early, nervous and remorseful. When Sarah walked in, she looked tired but strong. They sat in silence for a moment before Mark spoke. "I know I can't undo what I did," he said, voice trembling. "But please let me prove I've changed." Sarah's eyes welled with tears. "You risked everything for what you let her into our home. into our bed. Mark reached for her hand, but she pulled back slightly. I don't expect forgiveness overnight, he said. Just the chance to be a good father. To be better. I need time, Sarah whispered. I have to think about what's best for the baby. Mark nodded. It wasn't a reconciliation, but it was a beginning. There was still pain between them, but there was also a door left ajar, just wide enough for the possibility of redemption. Mark moved into a small apartment, giving Sarah space while she stayed home preparing for the baby. He began therapy and parenting classes, determined to change. Jessica helped coordinate visits, and Sarah let Mark attend doctor appointments. At the ultrasound, they saw their daughter's face. Mark cried, overwhelmed. Sarah remained distant, but acknowledged his efforts. She appreciated his support, even if trust hadn't returned. Hints from Jessica suggested Sarah hadn't given up entirely. Still, the wounds ran deep. For now, they focused on the baby, unsure of what the future held, but both still holding on just a little. When Sarah went into early labor, she called Mark in panic. He rushed her to the hospital and never left her side. For 3 tense days he stayed by her bed, helping however he could. As Sarah rested, Mark silently vowed to earn back her trust. One night, she stirred and whispered, I hate what you did, but I see you're trying. Mark held her hand gently. I'll do whatever it takes. Her eyes softened. We'll see. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was hope. And for Mark, that was everything. Back home, on bed rest, Sarah allowed Mark to help during the day, though he returned to his studio apartment at night. Their conversations grew more civil, focused on Emily's future. One afternoon, Sarah suggested counseling, not to save the marriage yet, but to learn how to co-parent. Mark agreed eagerly. Sessions with Dr. Christine Lee were raw and painful. Sarah voiced her heartbreak. Mark confronted his fears and guilt. It wasn't healing overnight, but it was a beginning. Each meeting chipped away at their distance, offering a small, flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, something could be rebuilt. At 9 months pregnant, Sarah went into labor. Mark was at her side through every contraction, with Jessica offering support. After hours of pain and anticipation, their daughter arrived, a healthy girl with a strong cry and a head full of dark hair. As Mark cradled Emily, Grace Anderson, tears streamed down his face. For a fleeting moment past, betrayals faded beneath the miracle of her birth. Sarah watched silently, eyes full of conflicting emotions. In that fragile peace, they shared an unspoken understanding. Mark devoted himself to fatherhood, staying up through night feedings, changing diapers, and caring for Sarah during recovery. Though still cautious, Sarah allowed him back into the home, but not her heart, not fully. The counselor advised they take things slow and focus on Emily's well-being. Carla's case concluded with her conviction. Mark was officially cleared, but the damage to his marriage endured. It took nearly a year of therapy and honest effort before Sarah was willing to try again. She laid out clear rules, complete transparency, shared accounts, no more secrets. Mark agreed without hesitation. They weren't the same couple as before, but in their brokenness, they found a way forward, anchored by love for their child and a hard-won trust. Roamed hope found its way back. Thank you for joining me on this roller coaster tale of betrayal, heartbreak, and the strenuous journey toward redemption. Life can twist us in unexpected ways, testing bonds and pushing us to the very edge of what we believe is possible. In Mark and Sarah's story, we're reminded that no matter how dark the night becomes, there's always a chance, however slim, for forgiveness, if we're willing to face our own failings and fight to make things right. Perhaps their story resonates with you, or someone you know, urging us all to recognize the fragility of trust and the power of second chances. If you found this story gripping and emotionally stirring, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps bring more dramatic, thought-provoking stories to life. Thank you again for watching, and until next time, stay tuned for more unforgettable tales.